Aeliana Valeur sat in silence amid the tranquil space of her private studio, the late afternoon light streaming through the large window casting gentle streaks across the white canvas. Her hand moved slowly over the frame, each brushstroke seeming to carry the sorrow she had carried since childhood. No one knew the true face of Étoile, the pseudonym she signed on every work, because Aeliana always kept her distance from the world. She had inherited her painting talent from her late mother, yet also bore the burden of rumors and whispers surrounding Étoile Valeur's mysterious death. Every time the brush touched the canvas, her heart fluttered with a mix of anticipation and regret. The wet paint gleamed under the studio lights, reminding her of the unfinished task, to clear her mother's name and uncover the truth behind that dark curtain of the past. Shattered memories of that final afternoon with her mother returned to Aeliana through the pungent smell of oil paint and the whispered voices of the women in the art patronage circle. Étoile, hailed as a genius painter, had been forced to copy the work of a powerful media magnate in exchange for a European exhibition contract. The accusation of idea theft followed Étoile into every corner of Paris, breeding bitterness and wounds that deepened into despair. Aeliana remembered the night her mother sat before the easel, tears streaming down her cheeks, lips trembling as she murmured, "My beloved child, I can't endure this any longer." The next morning, Étoile left the studio behind and was gone forever, leaving only a brief note, "The truth will emerge, do not weep for me." The pain of losing her mother was etched into every beat of Aeliana's heart, transforming her into a ghost drifting through the glittering city. She refused all interviews, shunned social media, and never released a portrait. Aeliana believed that only while Étoile's true identity remained a secret could she be free to pursue the traces left behind. But that freedom came with isolation and cracks in her relationships with friends and family. Whenever someone's gaze lingered, she remained silent, letting rumors rise and fade away. Some nights she stayed awake beside an unfinished painting, listening to her heart ache in the stillness. Amidst this turmoil, Aeliana decided to seek out someone who could decipher the hidden secrets, Julian Mercer, a renowned private investigator in London. Rather than expose the truth with fanfare, she wanted a discreet, quiet investigation. In Aeliana's mind, the truth was not a dazzling cloak but a delicate fabric that needed to be sewn with careful stitches of trust. She sent an unsigned letter, bearing only 3 words, "I need you," to Julian's office, then returned to her penthouse apartment overlooking the city lights. Her heart raced as she thought of their meeting, for Aeliana had never opened her heart to anyone but her mother, and now she had to rely on a stranger to unravel the most cruel tragedy of her life. When Julian arrived in Paris, Aeliana stood behind the thin curtain, watching him. He carried an air that was both composed and resolute, his gaze bearing a warmth seldom seen in an investigator accustomed to cold, hard cases. When they finally met, there was no glow of celebrity or confidence of a famed lawyer, just 2 wounded souls drawn together by a shared longing for justice. Julian asked few questions. He simply listened as Aeliana recounted every memory of her mother, her suspicions about those who had forced Étoile to betray her convictions, and the helpless rage that had festered in her heart. As the investigation began, each clue Julian uncovered plunged Aeliana into a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. The web of wrongdoing extended far beyond the art world, touching politics, economics, and hidden powers desperate to keep the past buried. Aeliana felt herself drawn deeper into the tragedy her mother had endured, as if fate itself were at work. Every secret letter, every witness statement, slowly revealed the broken pieces of Étoile's final warning: "They will not stop, be strong." An unexpected closeness with Julian blossomed. For the first time in years, Aeliana felt the comforting warmth of a hand offering solace and an eye sharing her pain. Julian was more than an ally in her quest. He was the only one who truly understood the relentless pressure that weighed on her. When she trembled over her mother's diary, Julian gently placed his hand on her shoulder and whispered, "You are not alone." Aeliana's heart skipped a beat, tears welling in her eyes. For so long she had known no one to rely on. But that fragile trust was shattered when Julian discovered that a clue in Étoile's correspondence pointed to a powerful woman, Julian Mercer, his own mother. Aeliana was stunned to learn that Lillian had orchestrated the vile plot that destroyed her mother's reputation and led to her ultimate despair. Betrayal tore through Aeliana's heart. Love and justice were now entangled with the very person she had come to trust. That night, after receiving the damning documents, Aeliana returned to her studio, her gaze vacant as she stared at the vivid hues on the canvas. Each brushstroke reminded her of her promise to her mother, and each felt like a knife twisting in her soul, knowing the mastermind was Julian's mother. She bit her lip until it bled, crimson droplets staining her white smock. Would she have the strength to face this painful truth, or would the past crush her final sliver of hope? In her darkest moment, Aeliana whispered to herself, "Mother taught me that truth endures, no matter the cost." Grief and resolve intertwined, igniting a flame within the night. She rose, wiped away the senseless blood, and resolved not to give up. The road ahead was fraught with peril, but Aeliana knew she had no other choice. She would see justice done for Solène and make Julian Mercer, Julian's mother, pay for her sins. In that moment, Étoile, the lone star, shone brighter than ever. At dawn's first light, Aeliana gathered the key documents and placed them beside Solène's letterbox. She looked up at the pale gray sky beyond the window, inhaled deeply, then turned toward the heavy wooden door. Julian waited on the other side, ready to step with her into the next chapter of investigation, and the trial of a love newly born. After that first meeting with Julian Mercer in the silent gallery, Aeliana returned to her 10th-floor apartment in an aged building at the heart of Paris. The space still carried the scent of oil paint and worn leather from sketches yet to be framed, much like her own heart, still searching for peace. Outside, the vast Parisian night stretched endlessly. Inside, Aeliana felt an unfillable void. She moved to the old wooden desk where her mother once sat and left behind those shattered fragments of memory. A wave of nostalgia blurred her vision. Seated in the velvet armchair, she picked up the ring worn by two mothers, Solène and Aeliana's grandmother at her birth, and placed it in her palm, then let her thumb stroke its polished surface. In that instant, a memory burst forth. Solène seated by the studio window in autumn, a stray feather from her brush drifting upward as she let the brush slip from her fingers and looked up at her little daughter with tear-filled eyes. "I've failed you," her mother had whispered. At the time, Aeliana didn't understand, only clung tightly to her mother. Days later, Solène was gone forever. Now, the unanswered question burned within Aeliana: who forced my mother to paint for them? And why did they dare trample on her reputation? She knew she couldn't untangle the web Solène left behind without a clear-headed, vigilant companion. Julian Mercer, with his resolute gaze and gentle smile, had given her fragile hope that he would not betray her. But could the man she trusted have the courage to face the truth, especially when it implicated his own family? The next day, Aeliana returned to her mother's studio at the end of a narrow cobblestone lane. The smell of oil paint had faded, replaced by drifting dust and pale shafts of sunlight piercing through a torn corrugated roof. She flipped on the lights, unveiling every shadow. On the wall hung Solène's largest unfinished sketch, a young dancer lifting her partner on a hazy stage, while behind the curtain stood a woman in a black blazer, her face streaked with tears. Aeliana shivered as she studied it, recognizing her mother and that other figure. Julian Mercer? Her hand shook, sweat beading on her brow as she examined each pencil line and every wet layer of pigment. Hatred and sorrow welled within her. Solène had poured her life into that painting to warn her daughter about the hidden forces waiting to enslave talented artists under a cloak of imitation. Aeliana recalled her mother's final words in the suicide note: "Don't let the past bind the present. Illuminate the darkness with the lamp of truth." She paced the studio slowly, stopping before the heavy paint mixing table where the letterbox and basic tools lay. She picked up a scrap of paper. Solène's hurried handwriting read, "I fear losing my honor more than my life." That fear, after all, was not hers alone. Aeliana asked herself, did she have the courage to face the curses and watchers of the art underworld? From Paris, Julian emailed that he had obtained records of a clandestine exhibition years ago where Solène first confronted Julian Mercer. Attached was a photograph of Lillian standing beside Solène, her expression both confident and ice-cold. A dagger seemed to pierce Aeliana's chest. She typed back, "Send me every related document." Her heart pounded with determination and dread at the pain about to surface. That icy Parisian night, Aeliana could not sleep. She sat by the window, turning Lillian's photograph over and over, then rose abruptly. Her elegant apartment felt like a cage, the golden lamps appeared pale, and her shadow stretched across the wall, a reminder of an unforgotten past. Wrapping herself in a shawl, she decided to venture out to a small tea house her mother once frequented. The cold east wind carried the damp scent of the Seine. The tea house La Muse lay hidden beneath birch branches, its warm lights spilling onto the quiet street. Aeliana steadied her hand on the wooden doorframe, inhaled deeply, and stepped inside. The interior was cozy, with rough stone walls, worn bookshelves, and watercolor paintings by the proprietor. She slipped into a corner by the window, ordered chamomile tea, her mother's favorite, and retrieved her personal journal. Her mother's hurried script whispered from beyond, "They betrayed me, but I will not let them rest." A sigh escaped Aeliana as she read, "Tomorrow, I will present them with a painting to shake the art world." That was the fateful exhibition where Solène displayed her true masterpiece under a pseudonym, and where the plagiarism scandal was fabricated, branding her a villain. Now Aeliana understood the full weight of her mother's struggle to restore her honor and make her voice heard. As the tea cooled, Aeliana glanced through the window and saw Julian waiting outside. His worried eyes met hers, and he entered. When he sat down opposite her, bearing files in hand, Aeliana felt a comforting warmth spread through her. Though the truth stung, she knew this journey, however treacherous, must not end in defeat. Julian's documents revealed fresh evidence, a mysterious phone call, Lillian's trip to Milan just before the exhibition, and testimony from a former assistant who recalled Lillian complaining about Solène's copyright as if it belonged to her family alone. Each fact was another stumbling block on the road to both courtroom and vindication. Aeliana clasped Julian's hand, her eyes shining, "I'm ready to face it all." That night, they sat late in the glowing tea house, mapping out each investigative step, planning how to release the documents, and bracing for Julian Mercer's backlash. The nostalgic scent of tea mingled with the faint odor of Julian's cigarette smoke, creating a bittersweet atmosphere suffused with resolve. Aeliana offered him a small smile. For the first time in years, her heart felt less lonely. In that quiet moment, Aeliana understood. The road ahead remained long, but with Julian by her side, each step carried the strength to paint the true portrait of her mother and bring light to Solène's memory. The next morning, Aeliana awoke to the first rays of sunlight filtering through her window. Inside her stirred a mixture of excitement and anxious turmoil. She bent over the files Julian had sent the night before, her eyes scanning internal emails, minutes of closed-door meetings, and the hastily handwritten journal entries of the former assistant. Every new piece of evidence felt like another blow carved into her anger toward Julian Mercer, yet it also made her wonder, could she trust that justice would prevail against the hidden powers bent on concealing their crimes? Aeliana donned her charcoal long coat, slung her bag over one shoulder, and stepped out of her apartment. Paris still buzzed with honking horns, but to her, every sound seemed slowed, leaving only the pounding in her chest each time she thought of the upcoming confrontation. She descended into the Saint-Germain-des-Prés metro station, carrying the claustrophobic weight of the underground air, a reminder that she had to move forward, no matter what. Julian was waiting at the little café by the Seine. He spotted Aeliana the moment she entered, gave her a small wave, and slid a white sheet of paper across the table. She unfolded it to reveal a London court summons with a bond for postponement. Julian explained, "Last night I contacted a lawyer in London. We need to file this case there to secure an independent investigation. The ruling will be far stronger." Aeliana stared at the glossy document under the warm lamplight, feeling both thrilled and reassured. She nodded. "I'll fly out at once. I don't want Lillian any time to prepare her defense." A weight lifted from her chest, but a new worry surfaced. Once her identity was revealed in court, nothing would remain hidden. That afternoon, they boarded a flight to London. In the cramped cabin, Julian sat beside Aeliana, his gaze never leaving her. As the plane took off, she closed her eyes and let her mind drift to the moment her mother first taught her to hold a brush. Solène had stood by their Provence studio window, the sunset staining the walls crimson, and smiled at her little daughter. "A true artist paints the truth, even when it's frightening." Her mother's words echoed in Aeliana's mind, fueling her sense of purpose. London greeted them with a light drizzle. Their lawyer escorted them to the Old Bailey, its solemn white stone columns standing firm. In the oak-scented corridors lined with the smell of fresh print, Aeliana held her breath as she walked by. She clutched her bag tightly. Inside was her mother's final sketch, a crucial surprise exhibit, Solène's drawing from the night before her death, annotated with the chilling note, "Someone will not let you see the dawn." The preliminary hearing opened with the plaintiff's identity kept confidential. As Julian's lawyer submitted the evidence, the rustle of paper filled the courtroom. Lillian Mercer appeared in formal attire, her cold gaze betraying not a flicker of concern. She sat as though watching an unimportant play. Aeliana watched from behind the curtain, hostility rising like a tide inside her. When the lawyer declared, "Mrs. Lillian Mercer coerced Solène Valeur into copying works under exclusive Mercer family copyright, shattering her honor and driving her to take her own life," Lillian's eyes momentarily softened. A swift crease appeared at the corner of her eye. Aeliana felt each of Lillian's heartbeats quicken, as if for the first time she grasped the gravity of her crime. The former assistant's testimony was read aloud. He had attended secret meetings, recorded Lillian's orders, and described how she had meticulously covered up the scandal. Each detail flustered Lillian further. When the court recessed, she refused to leave her seat, her expression stunned, as though her mask had been ripped away. During the break, Julian came to Aeliana's side. He gently touched her hand and whispered, "You're doing wonderfully." His warm eyes shared her heavy burden. Aeliana managed a smile, though inside she felt torn. She loved Julian, yet his mother was the culprit. That tangled truth made her heart ache every time she thought of it. In the afternoon session, the prosecutor demanded that Lillian Mercer publicly apologize to the Valeur family, pay reparations for their honor, and share all profits from the copied artworks. Aeliana sat quietly in the back row, recalling her mother's first tears before brushing Aeliana's hair. Solène had once said, "When justice arrives, welcome it as a warm sunrise." Before the court gave its verdict, Aeliana and Julian strolled along the Thames. The rain had ceased, and a weak beam of sunlight broke through the clouds, dancing on the rippling water. Julian proposed moving forward together. "After the verdict, if all goes well, we can start anew. You won't have to stay anonymous anymore." Aeliana looked up at him, hope and fear shining in her eyes. She wanted that. She longed to sign her work with her true name and to proclaim their love aloud, but her wounds ran too deep to take that step. As night fell and the lights of London sparkled against the hotel ceiling, Aeliana sat by the window, gazing at the city. She murmured her mother's words, "The truth lives on." Despite all the pain, she resolved to face the court the next morning and welcome the dawn of justice. And by her side, Julian, her guiding star, was ready to walk with her through the darkest night toward the light. The trial concluded in Aeliana's favor. Lillian Mercer received a harsh sentence, was forced to publicly apologize to the Valeur family, pay a substantial sum in damages to restore their honor, and pledge never to interfere in other artists' careers. When the words "justice has been served" rang out in the courtroom, Aeliana felt an unfamiliar warmth surge through her chest, the sensation of hope she had long believed shattered. Yet even in that moment of triumph, her mind was filled with broken shards of trust. Julian sat beside her, eyes full of compassion, while Lillian Mercer, his mother, rose with a defiant look rather than remorse. On the flight back to Paris, Aeliana reclined in first class, watching the clouds drift beneath the sunset glow. She recalled Julian's phone call to his mother immediately after the verdict, pleading with her to come apologize. "Mother, I know you were wrong. Please come see Ms. Valeur." His trembling voice had coaxed through the line, desperate for a genuine apology. But in Aeliana's mind, she pictured Julian Mercer dismissing all blame, shrugging off responsibility and continuing to spread rumors, as if oblivious to the devastation she had wrought. In the nights that followed, Aeliana could not sleep. She reached for her phone to review the messages she had sent Julian, thank yous, confessions of affection, shared grief, only to see his lone reply, "I'm sorry." It felt woefully insufficient against the anguish inflicted by his own mother. Her studio apartment grew colder than ever. The uncured paintings appeared like mirrors reflecting her still bleeding wounds. Aeliana realized that winning in court was only the beginning. The true challenge lay in reclaiming her trust and her heart. At dawn, when the balcony leaves still glistened with dew, Aeliana packed her suitcase and left Paris for Provence, her maternal homeland, seeking the peace of the old stream and fragrant lavender fields. As the train sped past emerald wheat fields, she tried to soak in the relief she felt for the first time in years. Yet her heart remained heavy, haunted by thoughts of Julian's promise, "I won't let you be alone," and Julian Mercer's stubborn denial, "I did nothing wrong." She wondered if Julian had the courage to stand by her against his own family, or if he would be swept away by the Mercer dynasty. In Provence, her grandmother's cottage still held every keepsake: the walnut easel, the lacquered painting stand, and the floral curtain Solène had embroidered with her own hands. Aeliana stepped inside, inhaled the scent of aged paper and gentle rosemary, family warmth and a mother's love distilled into a single breath. Her grandmother embraced her, tears in her eyes as she heard the tale of betrayal. "My dear child, I know you've suffered so much. Now I will stand by you." Her words rang like a lullaby, soothing Aeliana's wounded spirit. But peace proved fleeting. Days later, Aeliana received word from Julian's office. Julian Mercer had circulated doctored photos, fabricating Solène Valeur's confession to idea theft, in an effort to overturn the verdict. The cruelty and cunning of that scheme felt like a vice around Aeliana's chest. She turned away, outraged that her mother's authentic paintings were once again drowned by lies. This time, she would not endure silently. Her gaze hardened, determined to shatter every dark conspiracy. Without warning, Julian arrived in Provence one sunny afternoon, his voice trembling. Are you okay?" Aeliana looked up as tears she'd held at bay finally spilled over. She rushed into his arms, letting his strong shoulders bear her pain. Among the rustling lavender, they resolved to launch a new legal offensive, to quash the false narratives, and to demand that Julian Mercer face the full measure of justice. They vowed to walk the rugged path together, love and the pursuit of justice now inseparable. That moonlit night in Provence, Aeliana sat at the old easel, moonbeams glinting on her sketches. She redrew Solène's face, no longer fearful, but alight with resolve. Each brushstroke carried fresh hope, that love would conquer deceit, that her mother's spirit could rest in peace, and that she could live boldly as Aeliana Valeur beside the man she loved, even if the world stood against them. As the cicadas sang, she whispered, "Mother, I have found my strength, and I will not let anyone drag me back into darkness." And under that silver moon, Aeliana and Julian clasped hands, pledging to follow the light of truth together, no matter how treacherous the road ahead. The first month in Provence passed amid nostalgic scenes, golden sunlight shimmering on olive trees, fields of lavender stretching into the distance, cicadas humming on Grandma's porch. Aeliana used the lull after the trial to heal her mind, yet deep within her burned the fierce desire to continue her quest for complete justice. Mornings she sketched journeys and the roads leading to the truth. Afternoons she conferred with Julian on gathering more evidence. Julian had contacted several key witnesses who had once worked alongside Julian Mercer. They confirmed that not only Solène Valeur, but many other artists had been coerced to share their ideas under subtle threats. Within the weathered walls of Solène's studio, Aeliana and Julian sifted through old files and uncovered a trove of documentary photographs, handwritten letters showing Lillian arranging illicit deals with exhibition curators, terse contracts invoking Mercer brand protection. Seeing these, Aeliana's skin crawled, but her gaze steeled with resolve. On a quiet Provençal night, they sat at Grandma's small tea table. The aroma of herbs mingled with faint incense, creating a space both serene and sacred. Aeliana looked at Julian, voice trembling. "Is this evidence convincing enough?" He nodded, eyes alight with determination. "Once the court accepts it, we'll close the chapter on the crimes my mother and yours endured." She smiled, though her mind echoed her mother's words. Truth is the symphony of justice and courage. Over the next week, Julian returned to London to finalize supplemental filings, while Aeliana stayed on, reaching out to other artists pressured by Mercer. She sent discreet letters under the name Étoile, her talisman protecting her identity as she helped colleagues. Many replied with choked voices. They feared retaliation, yet their enduring grievances drove them to stand up. Each story, each testimony, knotted Aeliana's heart, for she understood the destructive power of lies and the devastation of stolen dreams. One weekend afternoon, Aeliana received an email from Julian. "Meet me in Paris." She hurriedly packed her unfinished sketches, donned her coat, and caught the earliest train. The city of love buzzed with church bells and flower vendors' calls. They arranged to meet at Les Dumagos, the very café where Solène once held secret talks with her assistant. Julian greeted her with a warm smile and eyes full of trust, handing her a small suitcase packed with affidavits, documents, and recorded conversations, all translated, certified, and ready for the court. Aeliana hugged the case to her chest, as though embracing the simplest hope, that justice never sleeps. But upon stepping onto the sidewalk, snowflakes drifted down, and the scene seemed to hush. The cold bit through her thin coat, making her shiver. Julian gently pulled her close and draped a woolen shawl over her shoulders. "Don't let the chill break your spirit." She looked at him and saw profound empathy. He was ready to share every hardship with her, even though his family had been the enemy. That pledge touched her core, igniting fresh faith that true love can heal and empower. Back in Provence, amid the vineyard landscapes, Aeliana felt the weight of her duty. She was fighting not only for her mother, but for every artistic dream trampled by power. She spent the night sketching her vision of the future, a large canvas depicting her mother standing in light, surrounded by artists emerging from the shadows. Each stroke and wash carried her dedication and thirst for justice, a vow never to let such crimes recur. The next morning, Aeliana entered the studio to find her grandmother waiting, face gentle. She placed a cup of coffee on the table and said softly, "I know what you will do." Aeliana nodded, her tone steady. "I'll release all the evidence to the public, not just to clear my mother's name, but to show everyone that talent cannot be bound by power." Grandma smiled, pride shining in her eyes. "You have inherited Solène's spirit." And so, as the Provençal dawn broke in brilliant light, Aeliana prepared to launch the second wave of evidence disclosures, braced for fierce backlash from Julian Mercer. Yet by her side, her love for Julian stood as an eternal source of strength. Hand in hand, they turned toward the future, a future where justice is honored and the light of artistic dreams shines ever brighter. Morning sunlight filtered through the olive branches, scattering golden streaks across Aeliana's desk. She sat before her computer, eyes intent on the stream of emails and legal briefs Julian had sent. The studio was unnervingly quiet, broken only by the faint crackle of paint drying along the canvas edge, echoing each ragged breath she drew. Aeliana felt as if an invisible hand were squeezing her heart. The next hearing loomed, and Julian Mercer was assembling a battalion of lawyers to strike back, spreading forged photographs and clandestine recordings to obliterate every scrap of evidence she and Julian had gathered. A week earlier, Lillian had planted a short article in the Art Chronicle, claiming that in a covert interview Étoile Valeur had admitted to drawing inspiration from other painters. Like a dagger to the heart, the rumor exploded throughout Europe's art community. Aeliana spent sleepless nights tracing the story back to the PR firm controlled by Julian Mercer. Anger and doubt warred within her. Could justice endure when power and money could silence the truth? She glanced at her mother's old sketch, Solène's sorrow-filled yet steadfast gaze, and at the draft of the suicide note on her desk, which read plainly, "No one has the right to steal my brush." Swallowing her fear, Aeliana reached for her phone and called Julian. His warm voice answered, "I know you're worried. The second batch of evidence has been submitted for review. We'll counter every one of their claims with authenticated documents from the Louvre archives." At that, her pulse calmed. She trusted Julian's skill and conviction that the truth would ultimately prevail. In the nights that followed, Aeliana could not sleep. She reached for her phone to review the messages she had sent Julian, thank yous, confessions of affection, shared grief, only to see his lone reply, "I'm sorry." It felt woefully insufficient against the anguish inflicted by his own mother. Her studio apartment grew colder than ever. The uncured paintings appeared like mirrors reflecting her still bleeding wounds. Aeliana realized that winning in court was only the beginning. The true challenge lay in reclaiming her trust and her heart. At dawn, when the balcony leaves still glistened with dew, Aeliana packed her suitcase and left Paris for Provence, her maternal homeland, seeking the peace of the old stream and fragrant lavender fields. As the train sped past emerald wheat fields, she tried to soak in the relief she felt for the first time in years. Yet her heart remained heavy, haunted by thoughts of Julian's promise, "I won't let you be alone," and Julian Mercer's stubborn denial, "I did nothing wrong." She wondered if Julian had the courage to stand by her against his own family, or if he would be swept away by the Mercer dynasty. In Provence, her grandmother's cottage still held every keepsake, the walnut easel, the lacquered painting stand, and the floral curtain Solène had embroidered with her own hands. Aeliana stepped inside, inhaled the scent of aged paper and gentle rosemary, family warmth and a mother's love distilled into a single breath. Her grandmother embraced her, tears in her eyes as she heard the tale of betrayal. "My dear child, I know you've suffered so much. Now I will stand by you." Her words rang like a lullaby, soothing Aeliana's wounded spirit. But peace proved fleeting. Days later, Aeliana received word from Julian's office. Julian Mercer had circulated doctored photos, fabricating Solène Valeur's confession to idea theft, in an effort to overturn the verdict. The cruelty and cunning of that scheme felt like a vice around Aeliana's chest. She turned away, outraged that her mother's authentic paintings were once again drowned by lies. This time, she would not endure silently. Her gaze hardened, determined to shatter every dark conspiracy. Without warning, Julian arrived in Provence one sunny afternoon, his voice trembling. Are you okay?" Aeliana looked up as tears she'd held at bay finally spilled over. She rushed into his arms, letting his strong shoulders bear her pain. Among the rustling lavender, they resolved to launch a new legal offensive, to quash the false narratives, and to demand that Julian Mercer face the full measure of justice. They vowed to walk the rugged path together, love and the pursuit of justice now inseparable. That moonlit night in Provence, Aeliana sat at the old easel, moonbeams glinting on her sketches. She redrew Solène's face, no longer fearful, but alight with resolve. Each brushstroke carried fresh hope, that love would conquer deceit, that her mother's spirit could rest in peace, and that she could live boldly as Aeliana Valeur beside the man she loved, even if the world stood against them. As the cicadas sang, she whispered, "Mother, I have found my strength, and I will not let anyone drag me back into darkness." And under that silver moon, Aeliana and Julian clasped hands, pledging to follow the light of truth together, no matter how treacherous the road ahead. The first month in Provence passed amid nostalgic scenes, golden sunlight shimmering on olive trees, fields of lavender stretching into the distance, cicadas humming on Grandma's porch. Aeliana used the lull after the trial to heal her mind, yet deep within her burned the fierce desire to continue her quest for complete justice. Mornings she sketched journeys and the roads leading to the truth. Afternoons she conferred with Julian on gathering more evidence. Julian had contacted several key witnesses who had once worked alongside Julian Mercer. They confirmed that not only Solène Valeur, but many other artists had been coerced to share their ideas under subtle threats. Within the weathered walls of Solenne's studio, Aeliana and Julian sifted through old files and uncovered a trove of documentary photographs, handwritten letters showing Lillian arranging illicit deals with exhibition curators, terse contracts invoking Mercer brand protection. Seeing these, Aeliana's skin crawled, but her gaze steeled with resolve. On a quiet Provençal night, they sat at Grandma's small tea table. The aroma of herbs mingled with faint incense, creating a space both serene and sacred. Aeliana looked at Julian, voice trembling. "Is this evidence convincing enough?" He nodded, eyes alight with determination. "Once the court accepts it, we'll close the chapter on the crimes my mother and yours endured." She smiled, though her mind echoed her mother's words, "Truth is the symphony of justice and courage." Over the next week, Julian returned to London to finalize supplemental filings, while Aeliana stayed on, reaching out to other artists pressured by Mercer. She sent discreet letters under the name Étoile, her talisman protecting her identity as she helped colleagues. Many replied with choked voices. They feared retaliation, yet their enduring grievances drove them to stand up. Each story, each testimony, knotted Aeliana's heart, for she understood the destructive power of lies and the devastation of stolen dreams. One weekend afternoon, Aeliana received an email from Julian, "Meet me in Paris." She hurriedly packed her unfinished sketches, donned her coat, and caught the earliest train. The city of love buzzed with church bells and flower vendors' calls. They arranged to meet at Les Dumagos, the very café where Solène once held secret talks with her assistant. Julian greeted her with a warm smile and eyes full of trust, handing her a small suitcase packed with affidavits, documents, and recorded conversations, all translated, certified, and ready for the court. Aeliana hugged the case to her chest, as though embracing the simplest hope, that justice never sleeps. But upon stepping onto the sidewalk, snowflakes drifted down, and the scene seemed to hush. The cold bit through her thin coat, making her shiver. Julian gently pulled her close and draped a woolen shawl over her shoulders. "Don't let the chill break your spirit." She looked at him and saw profound empathy. He was ready to share every hardship with her, even though his family had been the enemy. That pledge touched her core, igniting fresh faith, that true love can heal and empower. Back in Provence, amid the vineyard landscapes, Aeliana felt the weight of her duty. She was fighting not only for her mother, but for every artistic dream trampled by power. She spent the night sketching her vision of the future, a large canvas depicting her mother standing in light, surrounded by artists emerging from the shadows. Each stroke and wash carried her dedication and thirst for justice, a vow never to let such crimes recur. The next morning, Aeliana entered the studio to find her grandmother waiting, face gentle. She placed a cup of coffee on the table and said softly, "I know what you will do." Aeliana nodded, her tone steady. "I'll release all the evidence to the public, not just to clear my mother's name, but to show everyone that talent cannot be bound by power." Grandma smiled, pride shining in her eyes. "You have inherited Solène's spirit." And so, as the Provençal dawn broke in brilliant light, Aeliana prepared to launch the second wave of evidence disclosures, braced for fierce backlash from Lillian Mercer. Yet by her side, her love for Julian stood as an eternal source of strength. Hand in hand, they turned toward the future, a future where justice is honored and the light of artistic dreams shines ever brighter. Morning sunlight filtered through the olive branches, scattering golden streaks across Aeliana's desk. She sat before her computer, eyes intent on the stream of emails and legal briefs Julian had sent. The studio was unnervingly quiet, broken only by the faint crackle of paint drying along the canvas edge, echoing each ragged breath she drew. Aeliana felt as if an invisible hand were squeezing her heart. The next hearing loomed, and Lillian Mercer was assembling a battalion of lawyers to strike back, spreading forged photographs and clandestine recordings to obliterate every scrap of evidence she and Julian had gathered. A week earlier, Lillian had planted a short article in the Art Chronicle, claiming that in a covert interview Étoile Valeur had admitted to drawing inspiration from other painters. Like a dagger to the heart, The rumor exploded throughout Europe's art community. Aeliana spent sleepless nights tracing the story back to the PR firm controlled by Julian Mercer. Anger and doubt warred within her. Could justice endure when power and money could silence the truth? She glanced at her mother's old sketch, Solenne's sorrow-filled yet steadfast gaze, and at the draft of the suicide note on her desk, which read plainly, "No one has the right to steal my brush." Swallowing her fear, Aeliana reached for her phone and called Julian. His warm voice answered, "I know you're worried. The second batch of evidence has been submitted for review. We'll counter every one of their claims with authenticated documents from the Louvre archives." At that, her pulse calmed. She trusted Julian's skill and conviction that the truth would ultimately prevail. That afternoon, they met in Solenne's old studio, where Aeliana had stored the updated dossier. Surrounded by memories, they pored over each item: the original contract, emails between Lillian and the Milan curator, postal receipts marking Solenne's work's arrival, and a notarized testimony from an independent witness. They treated every document like a treasure, knowing that a single oversight could give Lillian the opening she needed. Suddenly, Aeliana paused. The sunset light cast her long shadow on the wall, a reminder that time would not wait. She gripped her paintbrush and whispered, "Mother, I will not let you suffer in vain." Her heart thundered with resolve. Julian placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, his eyes soft. "I'm here. You're not alone." His reassurance was a warm beacon amid the storm of Lillian's counterattack. On the day of the second hearing in London, with her identity no longer cloaked, Aeliana and Julian entered the courtroom in formal attire, each forcing calm they did not feel. Julian Mercer's lawyers projected doctored images and malicious rumors onto a large screen, unleashing a barrage of dirt aimed at her and her mother's honor. The gallery fell silent, save for the click of the projector. When it was her turn to rebut, Aeliana's lawyer rose and presented proof certified by the Louvre, the receipt dated at Solenne's original painting, with no connection to any copies Lillian had circulated. Then Julian played a recording of the Milan curator and Solenne's former assistant, Lillian's own words demanding Solenne produce a piece within 1 week, with all copyrights ceded to the Mercer family. The courtroom erupted as these archival records shattered every denial. Aeliana sank into the back row, her heart pounding so fiercely she closed her eyes and leaned into the chair. But when she looked at Julian, pride shining in his gaze, she realized every hardship had been worth it. Justice had a real chance. The hearing concluded with Julian Mercer bowing her head, regret and disappointment flickering across her face. Outside, London rain pelted their coats as they emerged from the courthouse. Julian quickly enveloped Aeliana in his raincoat, patting her shoulder. "You did brilliantly." She exhaled, closing her eyes to savor the rare peace. She knew the legal battle might continue. Lillian could appeal and unleash new tactics, but now she was unafraid. With Julian by her side, and her heart emboldened by trust and love, she was ready. On the train back to Provence, Aeliana watched the rain lash the tracks. In her mind, her mother sat beside her, smiling with pride. Though the world outside was damp and cold, an intense yearning burned within her. Soon, she would unveil her first work signed with her true name, Éliana Valeur, so that the world would know her, the daughter who continued the timeless song of dignity and truth. And to the rhythmic thunder of wheels on rails, Aeliana smiled, quietly envisioning a future, a peaceful Provence where she and Julian would build a new life, free to paint their dreams beneath an endless blue sky, where truth is always honored and love triumphs over darkness. That heavy London morning began with rain pattering against the window of the small flat where Aeliana and Julian were staying. Her heart clenched each time she thought of the fateful meeting with Julian Mercer, the woman who had stripped Solenne of her honor and was now poised to destroy Aeliana's happiness. Aeliana cast one last look at Julian before stepping outside. His eyes held regret, yet also a steadfast belief that Lillian's conscience could still be stirred. She drew a silent breath and steeled herself to be strong, even if every fiber of her soul yearned to flee to an unknown horizon. They arrived at the small conference room in the law offices where Lillian had been summoned. The powerful matriarch entered in a tailored black suit, her ash-silver hair loose around her shoulders, her gaze cold as a mirror reflecting every wound she had inflicted. As Aeliana approached, her heart stung with 1,000 needles. Lillian refused to lower her gaze. Instead she said coolly, "I've heard all the accusations. But an apology? That is something I cannot offer." No hint of remorse, only a proud, ruthless rigidity. Aeliana's eyes flashed with anger and despair. She fought to keep her voice steady, though it trembled with the bitterness choking her throat. "You know you stole my mother's honor, stole her freedom, and now you'd steal my happiness, too. But you will not escape that guilt." Each word pierced like a spear into Lillian's pride. The older woman's eyes dropped in surprise for a moment before she offered a cold smile. "Everything has its price. And I will fight you all the way." In that instant, time seemed to freeze. Julian stood beside Aeliana, fists clenched, his eyes revealing the pain of failing to sway his own mother. He stepped forward, gently placed a hand on Aeliana's shoulder, and murmured, "You are not alone. I will fight with you, even if it means standing against the entire Mercer clan." His voice carried a tender, resolute promise, like a lighthouse guiding her through the storm. Tears welled in Aeliana's eyes, torn between anguish and unshakable faith in the love that gave her strength. Leaving the conference room, they walked the long corridor in silence. Aeliana felt the chill in the air, but inside her a fierce resolve burned bright. She turned to Julian, eyes shining. "We will not stop until your mother is fully held accountable. I will pursue this lawsuit to the end, so the world recognizes the truth." Julian embraced her, whispering, "I vow to see it through with you." In damp London's hush, the two exchanged their unyielding promise, ready to face whatever dangers lay ahead. Back at the flat, Aeliana began packing. She decided to leave the noisy city and return to Provence for peace, while also preparing for the next phase of the case, a public confrontation where all evidence would be laid bare for the world to judge. She looked at Solenne's photograph displayed on the table and offered a fragile smile. "Mother, I will not give up." And when night fell, the soft glow of the lamp by the window bore witness to the determination of a lone star, now empowered to stand against the darkness and continue on the path that traded freedom for love. The morning in Provence stretched out beneath rosy sunlight, yet Aeliana's heart was still tangled by the events in London. She sat by the window, cradling a steaming cup of herbal coffee, her gaze drifting toward the lavender fields as she sought a measure of peace within. Beside her, Julian was drafting their first press release, revealing the full dossier of evidence against Lillian Mercer's coercion and defamation. As Aeliana read the black and red text on the screen, a surge of emotion washed over her, equal parts yearning for justice and fear that public opinion might turn, that the truth could be twisted once more. She set her cup down and opened her mother's journal. The scrawled entries in smeared ink looked like tears Solène had shed while fighting to stay composed under crushing pressure. "Paint the truth, even if the world turns away," Solène had written. Aeliana closed her eyes, memories flooding back, her mother guiding her small hand on the canvas, whispering, "Art demands a heart of fairness." Now she had to carry on that legacy, despite the dangers and despite the storm of public scrutiny they were about to unleash. They worked non-stop all day. Julian coordinated with the press and mapped out the media network. Aeliana combed through every detail, verifying evidence to leave no loopholes. Only late in the afternoon, as the sunset gilded the olive trees, did they pause. Julian handed her a printed draft, a concise case summary, an evidence checklist, and a pledge of transparency from the plaintiff. Together, they fine-tuned every word to strike the right balance of solemnity and emotion. Once the release went live, social media and art forums exploded. Major outlets republished the story, and comment threads skyrocketed. Aeliana watched the feed on her laptop, her pulse racing as hashtags like #JusticeForValeur and #TruthInArt trended. Many artists posted images of Solène's work, sharing testimonials on the importance of creative freedom. Some celebrities voiced support, while her adversaries, the forces backing Lillian, fanned counter-rumors. At the frenzy's peak, a fabricated clip of Solène confessing to copying went viral, plunging the discourse into chaos. That night, Aeliana stepped into her grandmother's little garden. The new moon had not yet appeared, only a pale silver slash against a starry sky. She sighed, scrolling through posts, praise, criticism, insults. In that moment, loneliness welled in her heart. Without Julian by her side, she could not have endured. She gave a small, determined smile and looked back at the old house where her grandmother once sang her to sleep. The news that Aeliana Valeur steps forward would have made her mother proud, but it also meant awakening her most dangerous enemies. The next day, they flew back to London to prepare for the public press conference. A grand hall in a prestigious art centre had been booked, and media from across Europe were invited. In the temporary green room, Aeliana stood before a mirror in an elegant cream dress, her hair swept up neatly. Her heart thundered at the thought of dozens of cameras, blinking flashes, and ceaseless questions. She glanced at her left hand, where her mother once wore the family ring, now a symbol of the justice she intended to claim on stage. Moments before the event, Julian approached and gently laid a hand on her shoulder. "Are you ready?" he asked, his eyes radiating certainty, as if lending her his strength. Aeliana nodded and smiled. "With you beside me, I'm not afraid." Hand in hand, they walked onto the stage. Under bright lights, hundreds of lenses turned their way, reporters raised microphones, and anticipation crackled in the air. Julian opened the conference with a brief introduction, then passed the floor to Aeliana. Her voice rang clear and steady, each line touching the audience's hearts. She spoke of her mother's passion for painting, the elaborate scheme Julian Mercer had orchestrated, and then presented each photograph, audio recording, and letter. The large LED screen behind her displayed every piece of evidence, and the hall fell silent. Among those present, some wept, some nodded in admiration, while others frowned in skepticism. At her conclusion, Aeliana paused, looked directly into the cameras, and declared, "A great mother not only gives us life but teaches us to face the truth with courage. My mother suffered injustice, but I believe that tomorrow, art will triumph over deceit." Her words cut through the murmur and were met with sustained applause. Julian beamed, his hand resting proudly on her shoulder. In that moment, she stepped out of the shadow of Étoile, and the world embraced Aeliana Valeur, daughter, artist, and champion of justice. In the days that followed, the press praised her bravery, and public sentiment swung firmly in her favor. Under mounting pressure, Julian Mercer issued a belated apology, empty in the face of overwhelming evidence. Aeliana stood outside the art center, sipping hot tea, watching passers-by, respectful glances, admiring smiles, even a few envious stares. Returning once more to Provence, she stepped through her grandmother's gate under a diamond-bright afternoon sky. Her grandmother greeted her with a radiant smile and placed a letter on the table, an offer from a renowned gallery for an exclusive exhibition, on the condition that she sign with her true name. This proof that her name now carried real weight made her grandmother beam with pride. Julian arrived moments later, his eyes full of love and admiration. In the vineyard's serene embrace, they sat together before the lavender garden, savoring coffee and sharing the whirlwind of emotions from recent days. Aeliana rested her head on Julian's shoulder and whispered, "I never imagined I could emerge from darkness like this." Julian kissed her hair and replied, "Every happiness has its price. And we will live in this light together." Dawn mist still clung in silvery drops to the olive leaves when Aeliana awoke, feeling the ache spread through her chest. She recalled the last moment with Julian in Provence, the hurried kiss, his promise "I won't leave you," and the depth hidden in his eyes. Yet as social media and the press uniformly posted their support, Aeliana knew she was about to enter the most difficult phase, the final civil trial against Julian Mercer, Julian's mother, where every measure of damage to honor, spirit, and finances would be decided. At sunrise, she left the studio carrying a suitcase heavy with evidence. On the train back to London, each station stop felt like a stab at her heart as she thought of her mother, Solène, who had not lived to see this moment of justice come to life. She opened her notebook and jotted a quick journal entry. Tomorrow I will fight for my mother. I will not flinch before the one who stole her freedom. Every word burned with determination, warming her from within like a flame dispelling a long, dark winter. Upon arriving in London, Aeliana and Julian hurried to their lawyer's office. Together they reviewed every piece of evidence one last time: the appraisal report on the original painting, the earlier interim ruling, the Louvre's confirmation letters, and especially Julian Mercer's private letters to the exhibition curator, which laid bare her scheme to manipulate Solene's mind. Julian watched Aeliana nervously crush her coffee cup between her fingers, then gently placed his hand over hers and squeezed. "I believe in you." In that moment, Aeliana understood that, however daunting the challenge, she could not fail with him by her side. The civil hearing convened at the High Court. The courtroom was draped in the damp grey of a London morning, the visitor benches filled with members of the press, fellow artists, attorneys, and the merely curious. When Julian Mercer entered, she wore her power in a tailored black suit, her face showing not a flicker of remorse. Behind her stood her formidable legal team, a legion sworn to defend her fortress of privilege. Aeliana took her place at the plaintiff's table, her gaze steady yet tinged with sorrow for her late mother, crushed by the very power Julian represented. Aeliana's lawyer outlined the emotional and reputational harm suffered first by Solene and then by Aeliana herself over the years. They presented crystal-clear proof, the independent expert report establishing that the disputed paintings were not Solene's copies, testimony from the former assistant and the Milan curator confirming Lillian's coercive directives, and the stack of letters, emails, and contracts exposing her web of lies. Each piece of evidence was published before the court in silence so profound that only the whisper of paper and the hum of recording devices could be heard. When it was Lillian's turn to respond, her counsel tried to dismiss it all as false allegations and unsubstantiated evidence. Lillian herself rose suddenly and strode to the witness stand. Her voice rang ice-cold. "I never forced Mrs. Valeur to do anything against her will. All these accusers simply seek to exploit this case for attention." This display of confident denial caused a few heads to shake in doubt, but the majority seated already understood the truth laid bare by the incontrovertible evidence. The hearing's crucial moment came when Julian stepped forward and played the secret recording in which Lillian instructed her assistant, "If Valeur doesn't finish in time, force her to sign the contract assigning all copyrights to my family." Lillian's voice was unmistakable, leaving no room for denial. She fought to conceal her shock, her hands trembling as she gripped the stand. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom, once respectful gazes toward her transformed into suspicion and outrage. Aeliana rose and walked slowly toward the stand, her eyes locked on Lillian. "You stole my mother's honor, and for years you forced me to live in the shadow, afraid to sign my true name on my work. Today, I stand here not only for my mother but for everyone oppressed by the deceit of power. I demand that you take full responsibility, and I will not rest until justice is fully served." Her words rang with such force that the courtroom fell silent, then erupted in applause. A brief hush followed by the judge's gavel brought the verdict: Julian Mercer would bear full civil liability, compensating Aeliana and the Valeur family with a substantial sum. All references to Solene's alleged plagiarism would be retracted. Lillian must publish a full public apology in the major newspapers, and she would be barred from offering artistic consultancy for 5 years. As the pronouncement echoed, Aeliana felt a rush of fresh air flood the room that had long felt suffocating. Exiting the courthouse under steady rain, Julian embraced her in the forecourt. Their faces were drenched in equal parts rain and tears, but their mouths curved in joyful smiles. Aeliana nuzzled against his chest, listening to his heart beat a triumphant rhythm. Under their shared umbrella, they stepped over puddles shimmering like silver, each footfall carrying the promise of a new beginning, a life of freedom unshadowed by the past. Back in Provence, they were greeted by fields of purple lavender glowing in the golden dusk. Her grandmother waited at the gate, arms spread wide as if to embrace the whole world. Aeliana turned to Julian, her eyes shining. "We did it." He smiled and pressed a kiss to her forehead, and now you can sign every painting with your real name." In that instant, Aeliana's heart nearly burst, for beside her stood not only the man she loved, but the freedom and justice she had fought so valiantly to secure. The first dawn after the civil verdict filtered through the weathered wooden window frame of the Provençal cottage, bathing the old cupboards in warm light. Aeliana awoke with the echo of victory still resonating in her heart, a clear judgment, Julian Mercer held fully accountable, and her own name, Éliana Valeur, finally vindicated. Yet despite this triumph, her spirit remained unsettled. The legal battle may have been won, but countless challenges still lay ahead: public opinion, whispered criticisms, and her mother Solene's unhealed grief. When she descended to the kitchen, her grandmother had already laid out a simple breakfast of toasted bread with wildflower honey and steaming chamomile tea, the favorite of both mother and daughter. She smiled kindly, her eyes misting with pride. "Are you happy, my dear?" she asked. Aeliana nodded, offering a gentle smile as she tasted the sweet warmth of honey. But in that moment of comfort, her phone buzzed with cold news. Julian Mercer had filed an appeal and launched a fresh PR campaign to smear her and Julian. The terse line on the screen read, "They have not let us go." Aeliana's heart sank, but her grandmother placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder and whispered, "You have done so much. Rest now and regain your strength." Aeliana returned her grandmother's smile and resolved not to let yet another scheme from a twice-defeated foe crush her resolve. The next morning, she called Julian with steely determination. "We will answer the appeal, and I will work with you to silence every false accusation." His voice rang with conviction, "I am always by your side." Over the following days, Aeliana and Julian meticulously prepared the appellate brief. They reviewed every piece of evidence again, adding sworn statements from a dozen fellow artists who had publicly supported her, and 12 of Solene's original paintings, now held in private collections, to demonstrate her mother's singular creative vision. Night after night, they toiled under the lamp's glow, poring over dense legal documents as the yellow light bore witness to their steadfast commitment. Their work was punctuated by endless video conferences, urgent emails, and in-depth analyses by the art community. Social media buzzed without pause, but the tide of sympathy for justice surged ever higher. When London's court accepted their appeal, leaving the core verdict intact and limiting its review to financial damages alone, Aeliana exhaled in relief. At least her mother's honor remained untarnished. While awaiting the final decision, Aeliana spent idle afternoons back in Solene's old studio, the keeper of memories and unfinished dreams. She circled each wet stroke on the canvas as if listening to her mother's breath. At the final, incomplete painting, she sat down, placed her hand on the rough linen, and whispered, "Mother, I have made you proud. Now I will finish this work and sign my true name." A tear slipped down her cheek, carrying all her gratitude and unwavering love. That evening, Julian met her under the studio's archway. He held out a small box wrapped in white paper. Inside lay a slender steel pen engraved, "A. Valeur." "Use this," he murmured. Aeliana's heart swelled as she accepted the gift. She brought the pen to the sketch's margin and carefully inscribed Éliana Valeur in the corner of her mother's unfinished work. In that instant, her heart opened, embracing the freedom that had eluded her through years of anonymity. The appellate hearing was scheduled for the following week. On the eve of the session, Aeliana and Julian returned to London and took up residence in a modest flat near the courthouse. They spent a tranquil evening strolling along the Thames, the river's murmur calming their spirits. Julian turned to her with a tender smile. "Are you afraid?" he asked. Aeliana shook her head, feeling only a flutter of anticipation. "With you by my side, I believe we can overcome anything." He pressed a hand to her heart, both to reassure her and to feel her steady beat. The decisive day arrived more swiftly than expected. The appeals panel reaffirmed the original judgment: Julian Mercer must surrender her collection of forged paintings, pay substantial financial penalties, and remain barred from any advisory role in the art world for 3 years. When the clerk proclaimed, "The ruling stands," the courtroom seemed to tremble in collective release. Aeliana sat quietly, her hand clasped in Julian's. As the hearing concluded, they stepped out into a post-rain London bathed in fresh light, their spirits unburdened at last. Back in Provence once more, Aeliana wrapped herself in a light cloak and stood on the cottage's porch, gazing over the violet lavender fields under a glowing dusk. Her grandmother brought her a cup of tea and placed it in her hands. "Now mother can rest," she said softly. Aeliana nodded, tears like tiny stars reflecting in her eyes. "I've kept my promise to her," she whispered. In the distance, Julian raised his camera to capture this moment, the image of an artist who had reclaimed her voice, her freedom, and her love. Chapter 10 closed in the golden twilight, opening a new beginning for two hearts united, confident that the shadows of the past would no longer darken their future. The morning in Provence dawned as peacefully as any other, yet Aeliana still felt the bittersweet warmth of victory lingering in her heart. She woke to the soft sunrise, birdsong at her window, and a breeze carrying the scent of fresh grass. There were no heavy legal files, no worries about appeals or slander, only a blank canvas and an open sky before her. She stood on the balcony, gazing in silence at rows of lavender shrouded in mist, as if nature itself whispered that the darkness had passed and a new dawn was waiting. She had once thought she would never feel at home in that old house, never return to that place of memories. But now everything had changed. With the final judgment upholding all compensation terms and the ban on practice, Julian Mercer would serve her sentence, 3 years away from all artistic activities, a public apology, and the restoration of creative freedom to the artists she had oppressed. That very morning, the court's order arrived. Julian must report to the London Arts Council to account for her actions and make amends to the Valeur family. Aeliana exhaled softly, a serene peace washing over her. Yet deep inside, she still needed time to heal wounds that could not vanish overnight. Drawn by her artist's instinct, she returned to her mother's old studio, the place where Solène had painted her dreams of freedom. Gently, she wiped the dusty canvas and applied a fresh stroke of color to the unfinished painting, as if offering her mother a new beginning. Her hand trembled but was sure, for now each brushstroke was not to expose wrongdoing but to paint a sky of tranquility. In the quiet studio, her phone rang. It was Julian calling from London. He asked if she was well and then shared that everything at the detective agency had been arranged. The case files would be entrusted to the Louvre and the Musée d'Orsay as legal heritage, and he was organizing a charity exhibition to support scholarships for young painters. Hearing this, Aeliana smiled. His love was more than words, it was action, building their shared future. That afternoon, Julian arrived in Provence at the first blush of sunset, carrying a small box inscribed "For Aeliana, for your first signed exhibition." When she opened it, she found invitations to her solo show, From Light Through Darkness, featuring her mother's final work and her own newly completed paintings. Her golden hair caught the dying light as she kissed him on the cheek, her smile radiant. That evening, they walked through the lavender fields under a crescent moon, planning the exhibition. She spoke of her dream to establish an art scholarship fund so that hidden talents like hers might be celebrated without being shackled by power. Julian listened, eyes shining with belief. He promised to leverage his connections across Europe to make her dream real. In that moment, their love and their quest for justice fused into a hopeful symphony. At the opening night, amid applause from connoisseurs, Aeliana stood quietly under the brilliant lights. Taking the microphone, she proclaimed, "My name is Aeliana Valeur. I once hid behind anonymity for fear that power would crush artistic dreams. But today, I stand here not only for myself but for all who have been oppressed by lies. I hope each of these works will light the way, so that truth and freedom always reign in the artist's heart." The applause surged, and Julian, among the crowd, gently squeezed her hand, simple yet sealed with a promise of togetherness. When night fell, they returned to the little Provençal house. Her grandmother had prepared a cozy dinner, candles flickering on the antique table. She smiled warmly. "You have fulfilled your mother's hopes." Aeliana nodded, placing the final sketch, her mother framed by a garden of flowers, on the table. Tears glistened in her grandmother's eyes as she stroked her hand. "From now on, you may live by your true name, with all your heart." Surrounded by the scent of blossoms and the glow of candlelight, Aeliana turned to Julian. Her smile banished every shadow of the past. He held her close and whispered, "Together, we have written the most beautiful story of love and justice." She rested her head on his shoulder and gazed up at the starry night sky. Those stars she had admired for years were now her companions in a new life. Morning light filtered through the curtains of the little living room, rousing Aeliana after a night of dreams that straddled happiness and anxiety. She sat up, inhaled deeply the scent of damp earth after the night's rain, then made her way to the kitchen where her grandmother had already set out a cup of rose tea and honey biscuits. Her grandmother smiled at her, eyes filled with joy and concern. "Are you well, my dear?" she asked. Aeliana nodded, her upper arm trembling slightly as she lifted the warm cup, feeling its heat seep into her body, reminding her that life had turned a new page, yet fresh trials still lay ahead. After breakfast, Aeliana returned to the studio where the first sketches for her solo exhibition lined the walls. The memory of the court battles had receded, replaced by a flutter of anticipation for her new responsibility, founding the Valeur Fund, a scholarship for young talents from her homeland, especially those who, like she once was, lacked means and feared being overlooked. She sat at the old wooden desk, eyes drifting over her childhood ribbons of merit from kids' art contests, then meticulously drafted the fund's operating plan, selection criteria, seed funding sources, transparent financial reporting. Every figure, every detail weighed carefully. Her past experience had taught her that transparency is the surest defense against personal greed. Just then, Julian dropped by, clutching a folder of minutes from his meeting with the Louvre's board. He placed it on the table, pride shining in his eyes. "They've agreed to support the charity exhibition and to seed your fund," he said. Aeliana's lips curved into a trembling smile as her heart soared. Not only was her own life recovering, but her mother's legacy would now help the next generation. She reached out, clasped his hand, and whispered, "Thank you for walking through all of this with me." In that quiet moment, they both understood that their love had been forged in stormy seas, now as steadfast as lavender in morning dew. The weeks that followed whirled by in a hectic dance, mornings in Provence interviewing scholarship candidates, afternoons flying to London to meet partners, evenings on calls to Paris with the media team. Aeliana swung between exhilaration at approving the first round of applications and guilt at having been too busy to share tea with her grandmother on the porch. But whenever doubt crept in, she returned to the studio, gazed at her mother's graphite sketches on canvas, and found calm once more. Art taught her patience, and this new life taught her how to care not only for herself but for her community. One late autumn afternoon, as golden light bathed the Provençal fields, the online launch of the Valeur Fund took place in an old farmhouse. The hall was filled with images of Solen's classic works and Aeliana's fresh sketches. Her grandmother, tears in her kind eyes, turned to her, "You've turned your pain into something meaningful." Many young artists attended, their eyes shining with hope of a guiding hand. Aeliana took the stage, her voice as gentle as a mountain stream. "Every talent needs its creative spark. This fund honors my mother, who taught me that art is more than color, it is justice and compassion." Applause thundered through the room, affirming that her story had touched many hearts. That night, by a small hearth, Aeliana and Julian sat side by side as insects chirped outside. He handed her his phone, showing messages of thanks from scholarship applicants and requests for deadlines extensions from newcomers to the fund. She swiped closed the app, voice calm yet moved. "It all began with my mother's smile." Julian smiled back, "And now we smile at the world together." In the silent Provençal night, they gently kissed each other's foreheads, an artist who had rediscovered herself, and a detective who became her partner, sealing in each other the firm belief that no matter what challenges lie ahead, they would continue to paint extraordinary stories with love and justice. Savins, the little village nestled on the shores of Lake Saraponcon, greets Aeliana and Julian with a gentle air tinged by the scent of damp pine needles. When their car pulls up before her grandmother's weathered wooden house, The moss-carpeted stones seem to whisper welcome to its returning master. Aeliana opens the door and steps across the threshold, her heart reborn beneath the pink-gold sunset dancing on the lake. All the tension and shattered pieces of the past pause, giving way to a warmth and peace she thought she had long forgotten. Her grandmother sits in an armchair by the line where childhood quilts once hung, dream-stitched fabrics that still carry echoes of innocence. She beckons Aeliana to her side, eyes shimmering with relief. "You're home at last," she says. Aeliana smiles and leans against her grandmother's shoulder, exhaling in contentment. The long legal journey has finally ended, and the name Étoile that once hid her true self has given way to Éliana Valeur, artist, founder of an art fund, and daughter of Solène. In the hearth's glow, Julian fusses over the teakettle, observing each new moment as Aeliana rebuilds her life. His smile now lacks the urgency of courtroom days and instead shines with tender calm. When the water begins to whisper into steam, he carries 2 cups of herbal tea out to the porch. A soft breeze stirs the pines, sending ripples across the surface of the tea. Aeliana accepts her cup, breathes in the fragrant steam, then turns to him. "Thank you for coming home with me." He nods, eyes full of love. "You deserve this peace." The following days pass in a steady rhythm filled with simple joys. Mornings find Aeliana wandering the lavender garden with her sketchbook, capturing the lake's mirror and pine-clad hills. Afternoons, her grandmother teaches her how to make French crepes, laughter spilling over as batter splatters across the kitchen. Julian quietly helps plant spring bulbs in pots, arranging cheerful flowers to brighten every corner of the house. Each moment stitches together the fragments of Aeliana's soul. She is respected, she is loved, and she stands firmly on her own 2 feet. In this warm embrace, memories of her mother, Solène, become gentle companions rather than aching ghosts. Aeliana opens Solène's old journal, the faded scrawl reading, "I want you to paint dreams of freedom." Tears shimmer in her eyes as she vows to fulfill that dream with a new collection titled Freedom on the Water, a series of Provence-inspired studies and Lake Saraponcon scenes. Under the crystal sky, she dons her smock and sits before a blank canvas, letting bold strokes trace nature's breath. Not far away, Julian reads the message from London's courts. Julian Mercer has fully executed her sentence, paid her fines, and issued a public apology in major media outlets. The news in his inbox feels like a long-delayed triumph, justice at last complete. But he knows that life's scrutiny now turns to Lillian, while he and Aeliana have at last escaped the shadows of the past. He photographs Aeliana laughing beside her painting and sends it with a simple note, "You're as radiant as this dawn." The next afternoon, the opening of Freedom on the Water takes place in Solène's old studio. Young artists, old friends, and generous patrons gather among paintings hung on every wall. The soft golden lights create an atmosphere at once solemn and warm. Aeliana steps onto the dais, her gaze lingering on the lake's reflection in one canvas, and speaks, "This exhibition is more than my work, it is my mother's epic. She taught me that art is freedom, justice, and love." The room falls silent, then erupts in hearty applause. After the event, Provence returns to its quietude. Aeliana and Julian stroll hand in hand along the lakeside. The gentle waves lap at their feet as if soothing their hearts that have weathered storms and now look forward together. Aeliana turns to him, eyes bright with joy. "I think I'll stay here, run the fund and paint, while you shuttle between London and Savins to support the work." He smiles and kisses her forehead, "And every journey, I'll come straight back to you." The night before Julian's next train to London, they sit at the boat dock under a moonlit sky. They exchange a small letter, a pact unchangeable in which they promise to safeguard their home, share their work, and nurture their long-term dreams. Aeliana writes the final line, "Wherever you go, I will be here waiting." Julian replies with a gentle kiss, "You are my harbor." The early morning after the late autumn rain found Provence refreshed and cool, silver mist glistening atop the lavender fields. Julian awakened beside Aeliana and turned to watch her sleeping, her hair spilling over the pillow like gentle waves. He gently pressed his hand to her cheek, as if trying to hold on to that fragile moment before the world's noise returned. Today he would officially close his detective office in London, entrust all case files to his trusted colleagues, and set off for home, the little wooden house where he and Aeliana would continue painting the life they shared. The clatter of dishes below summoned them awake. In the cozy kitchen, her grandmother had laid out 2 plates of freshly made crepes, her face radiant with joy. She winked at Aeliana. "Your son is the freest man in the world today," she teased. Aeliana smiled and gave Julian a loving nod. She understood. True freedom meant more than leaving the city, it meant stepping out of the past's shadow and into the steadfast light of their love. After breakfast, they packed the last of Julian's London belongings. Suitcases overflowed with case files, certificates of merit, letters of gratitude, and small mementos. The photograph Julian had taken of Aeliana laughing before her canvas, the steel pen engraved "A Valeur," and the wooden box holding Solen's old paintbrush handles. Though they returned in silence, in their hearts it felt like a thunderous ovation, a celebration of the journey they had completed. Back in Provence, they placed each keepsake in the attic, where the scent of herbs would guard their legacy. In the warm afternoon light, Aeliana opened the studio door, set a new easel center stage, unrolled a fresh canvas, and in ink wrote the sign, Studio, École de Lumière. Julian guided her as she stepped through her first lesson sketches for the painting class she would teach local children. Her hand trembled, then she smiled confidently. "I will teach not only technique but the love of freedom and justice." The next morning, they wandered to the post office, sending 2 crates of case files to the museums and courts in London. Then they visited a small art shack where the children fresh from their trial classes displayed their work. Julian busied himself hanging the paintings, while Aeliana adjusted each splash of color with care. The children's bright eyes regarded them, once a detective and an artist who had been powerless, now free to dream of tomorrow. Aeliana inhaled deeply, feeling a sunflower bloom in her heart. That evening, they gathered around the kitchen hearth and admired the glow of the École de Lumière sign as the flames danced. Julian poured 2 cups of hot tea and placed one before her. "We did it," he said. Aeliana wrapped her hands around the cup, gratitude shining in her eyes. "Because of you, I dared to step out of the darkness." They clinked their cups, savoring the spreading warmth, and silently vowed to cultivate this home with love and faith. Under a star-filled Provençal sky, the sound of insects and whispering pines blended into a lullaby. Aeliana rested her head on Julian's shoulder and whispered, "I dream of a future where we travel the world together, bringing my mother's paintings to every gallery." He gently brushed her hair and replied, "And I will always cross every border by your side." In that moment, freedom was no longer a distant dream but the warm reality waiting for them each morning they woke. Sunrise after the late autumn rain draped the lavender fields in a new light, silver mist mingling with the flowers' heady scent. Aeliana awoke in the sunlit attic room and gently opened her eyes to the whisper of pine needles outside the window. She felt she had traversed a long journey of pain, justice, and love. Now her dream of freedom lay before her like a boundless sky. Beside her, Julian still slept, one arm draped over the coat she had absent-mindedly left on the pillow, the faintest smile on his face, as though savoring the peace they had longed for. Slipping quietly onto the wooden floor, Aeliana made her way to the window. She drew back the curtain, allowing the first rays of dawn to strike a small mirror on the wall, one she and her mother had once sketched in delicate ink. Today the mirror reflected not sadness but the bright face of an artist who had come home to herself. She exhaled, simple joy coursing through her, the joy of living, loving, and creating. Downstairs, her grandmother had already laid out a small tea table with crepes and French lychee jam, one of her mother's favorite treats. She smiled tenderly. "Today we celebrate fulfilling your mother's last wish," she said. Aeliana nodded, gratitude welling in her eyes. Her grandmother recounted the nights Solène painted long into the dark, her eyes alight with hope for the little girl who would inherit her legacy. Aeliana placed her hand over her heart, vowing never to forget her roots. That morning they strolled together through the lavender garden. Sunlight filtered through the leaves, casting dappled patterns at their feet like 1,000 silent blessings. Julian squeezed Aeliana's hand, pride unspoken in his gaze. "You've done so well," he whispered, his voice warm as melody. She looked up and smiled, "All for my mother, and for us." Memories of her mother's gentle smile, fierce determination, and paint-streaked hands flickered through her mind, stirring her with emotion. That afternoon, the inaugural class at the École des Lumières opened in a ceremony both solemn and warm. The children, dressed in simple smocks, clutched their first brushes with wide-eyed excitement. Aeliana stood before them, her heart racing like the first stroke on a fresh canvas. She told them her mother's story, about the power of truth and love, and encouraged each child to sign their own name on their work. Laughter and applause rippled through the room, affirming that life itself was worth celebrating. At the close of the ceremony, her grandmother emerged holding Solene's old wooden box. Inside lay her mother's final sketch, a young woman standing arms outstretched in the lavender fields, sunlight flooding the sky. She handed the box to Aeliana, voice choked yet filled with faith. "Your mother wanted you to feel freedom in every stroke." Aeliana lifted the drawing, tears tracing her cheeks. She understood that it was more than a keepsake, it was the flame she must carry forward to continue her mother's mission. That night, they returned to the wooden house and lit candles around the hearth. In the flickering glow, Aeliana and Julian opened Solene's box of sketches, softly reading her mother's annotations about nature, hope, and belief. Together they sat in the armchair, sharing dreams for the future, a small family where the painting of love and justice would never cease. Julian repeated his promise, "I will stand by you every day, painting all our dreams." She replied with a gentle kiss, clasping his hand. Before sleep claimed her, Aeliana took her mother's old journal and read it one last time. Slanted lines of ink still retained a faint trace of oil paint. The pages chronicled Solene's journey, from the heights of acclaim to the sacrifice of her freedom, and finally to the light of justice breaking through darkness. Aeliana resolved to one day retell that story in an illustrated book, so future generations would understand that freedom and truth are the most precious of all. By the window, moonlight illuminated Aeliana's face as she closed her eyes and imagined she and Julian traveling the world, bringing her mother's paintings to galleries everywhere and sowing hope among young artists. In that moment, her heart was at peace as it had never been before. She whispered a silent vow, "Mother, I have succeeded. I promise to live fully as myself, for the love and justice you taught me."